There is a silence more piercing than words, a silence not born of peace, but of distance, and when it comes from someone we care about, someone we once felt tethered to in unseen ways, that silence becomes unbearable. When someone you love or care for begins to ignore you, something primal inside is awakened, the fear of abandonment, the terror of rejection, the ache of inadequacy. The heart does not speak in logic, it pleads, it spirals, it rages. But in this state of emotional chaos, many make grave errors, not because they are foolish, but because they are wounded, and wounds, if not understood, become weapons against ourselves and against the possibility of reconciliation. If you truly want to reawaken a connection with someone who has gone silent, then the first thing you must understand is this: it is not what you do to them that matters most, it is what you do with yourself in their absence. Let us explore 5 critical things you must never do when someone ignores you, not merely to preserve the chance of getting them back, but to preserve your own dignity, power, and soul. When a person you deeply care about begins to ignore you, a peculiar kind of pain arises, not like the sting of rejection or the violence of betrayal, but the haunting confusion of invisibility. You exist, but not to them. You speak, but they do not hear, and in this unbearable absence, the ego cries out for recognition, for validation, for restoration. It seeks to reclaim what has been lost, not merely the other person, but a sense of self that now feels endangered. This is when many fall into the trap of chasing. But to chase is not an act of love, it is an act of fear. It is the ego's frantic attempt to avoid the abyss of being unwanted. It is the child within, crying for the mother to return, terrified that their worth is conditional and easily revoked. Chasing, in this context, becomes a psychological regression, a desperate bid not for union, but for survival. When someone pulls away, when they turn silent or indifferent, they are unconsciously setting a boundary. That boundary may come from their own wounds, their confusion, their pain, or even their disinterest. But regardless of its origin, that boundary exists, and when we chase, we violate it, not with malice, but with need. And in doing so, we force the person to retreat further, not because they hate us, but because our energy becomes invasive. There is a silent law in human dynamics. What we pursue too desperately will elude us. Not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. The soul resists being possessed. Imagine a flame bright, fragile, alive. To keep it burning, one must allow it space to breathe. But fear compels us to cup our hands tightly around it, to protect it from vanishing. In doing so, we suffocate it. Our desperation, though born of love, extinguishes what we hoped to save. Such is the paradox of emotional pursuit. The more we attempt to force closeness, the more we confirm to the other that we are not safe in ourselves. And intimacy cannot grow where fear dictates behavior. Think, too, of magnets. 2 magnets are drawn together by a natural force when aligned correctly. But if you force one toward the other with too much pressure, especially if their poles oppose, you meet resistance. Not because one hates the other, but because the energy is misaligned. Chasing is not a correction of polarity. It is a declaration of imbalance. It screams, "I am incomplete without you." And no soul, not even a willing one, can carry the weight of completing another without collapsing under the burden. In the modern world, where immediate communication is possible at all hours, this anxiety becomes amplified. The moment you see a read receipt without a reply, or a status update without acknowledgement, the mind begins to spiral. What did I do wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I say something? Should I fix this? And suddenly, you are not living your life, you are living in theirs. Your emotional state becomes tethered to their silence, your peace held hostage by their attention. This is no longer love. It is a loss of center. To chase is to abandon yourself. To pour out energy towards someone who has withdrawn is not generosity, it is self-depletion. And no relationship rooted in such imbalance can ever bear healthy fruit. Even if they come back, they return not to a partner, but to a prisoner of their validation, and in time that too will fracture. The more powerful act, the one that truly invites the possibility of reconnection, is stillness. Stillness is not coldness, it is not a game, it is the soul's return to sovereignty. It is the choice to pause, to breathe, and to say, I am not less just because you are distant. I do not need to beg to be seen. In this space something remarkable happens. The desperate energy that once repelled now transforms into magnetism. Because true attraction arises from wholeness, not from lack. There is a deeper truth here, one that many overlook in the pain of absence. Sometimes the person you are chasing is not the person who ignored you, but the version of yourself you were when they still looked at you. You are not just chasing them. You are chasing the mirror in which you once felt loved, seen, valued. But no other human being is meant to be your sole reflection. That work, the work of self-regard, must begin within. In ancient mythologies, the hero's journey always begins with a kind of separation, a tearing away from comfort, from familiar bonds, from external affirmation, and only through trials, solitude, and inner confrontation do they return stronger, clearer, wiser. So it is with the soul that resists the urge to chase. The silence of the other becomes the cave where transformation begins. In this cave you meet yourself, and if you can learn to sit with the pain without scrambling to erase it, you will find not just the strength to endure, but the wisdom to choose what is truly aligned with your spirit. This is not about manipulation. It is not about punishing the one who ignored you by becoming aloof. That is simply another form of reaction, another mask for hurt. This is about healing. It is about letting go of the compulsion to prove your worth to someone else. Because worth cannot be proved, only remembered. Real life stories echo this lesson again and again. The woman who texts a man every day after he goes cold, hoping to reignite his affection, only to be met with more silence. The man who sends flowers, messages, apologies, trying to repair something that cannot be mended by effort alone. Each gesture, though sincere, becomes a monument to a deeper truth that chasing cannot birth connection. Only self-respect can, and here's the irony, when you stop chasing not out of pride, but from peace you become magnetic again, because people are drawn to those who do not beg to be seen. They are drawn to the mystery of one who can stand in solitude and still radiate light. If the person who ignored you is meant to return, they will be drawn back not by your pleas, but by your presence. And if they do not, then their silence was not a rejection. It was a redirection away from dependence and towards self-realization. So when the urge rises, the urge to text, to explain, to make them feel something, pause, breathe, remember, the most powerful move in the face of silence is not noise. It is the quiet dignity of restraint. You don't need to turn cold, but you must remain still, not out of revenge, but out of reverence for your spirit, your time, your truth, because you are not a shadow waiting to be acknowledged. You are a soul waiting to be remembered first by yourself. There is something haunting in the space between connection and absence, the abrupt halt of affection, the echoing silence after once vivid conversation, the emptiness where laughter used to reside. These moments stir a deep unrest in the human psyche. The sudden ignoring of our presence feels like a tearing apart of our very being. In response, many are compelled to seek closure, to demand an explanation. We ask, almost pleadingly, "Why are you ignoring me? What did I do wrong?" The hunger for answers becomes a fixation, a holy grail we believe will deliver us from the anguish of not knowing. But this desire for closure is, at its core, a cry from the ego. It is the part of us that cannot stand the unknown, that clings to certainty even when it cuts, because ambiguity feels like annihilation. We believe that if we could only understand the reason behind someone's silence, then the pain will subside. We imagine that the words once spoken will grant us permission to move on, to make sense of the emotional chaos. But here lies the illusion silence itself is an answer, and often it is the most honest one we will ever receive. A person who chooses to ignore you has spoken volumes without uttering a single word. They have made a decision, consciously or unconsciously, that their presence, their acknowledgement, will be withheld. Whether their silence stems from confusion, indifference, guilt, cowardice, or malice, the fact remains the same. They are not showing up, and that absence is more revealing than any spoken justification. To beg for more is not to seek truth, but to seek comfort, and in doing so, we pay for that comfort with the currency of our self-respect. The tragedy is that begging rarely results in clarity. More often, it creates discomfort not just in the one being asked, but in ourselves. It says to the other, "You are responsible for regulating my inner world. You owe me peace. You owe me a reason to feel okay again." But no one can carry that burden, especially not someone who has already withdrawn. If they had the emotional depth or courage to explain, they likely would have. If they cared enough to preserve the connection, silence would not be their method. When you demand closure from someone incapable of offering it, you hand over your power to the very person who took it from you. And instead of healing, you deepen the wound. There is a certain dignity in accepting silence without protest. It is not a surrender to pain, but a surrender to truth. It requires a level of maturity that can sit with uncertainty, that can tolerate the storm of unanswered questions without seeking to control or solve them through another person. Because in truth, the ache of being ignored does not stem merely from the other's action. It is an echo of something older, something deeper. Their silence brushes up against our original fears, that we are not lovable, not enough, not worthy of continuity. These are the ancient wounds we carry from childhood, from past betrayals, from the first time someone we depended on chose absence over presence. To seek closure outside of ourselves is to turn away from these wounds. It is to pretend that if someone would just explain, the discomfort would vanish. But healing does not come from explanation. It comes from introspection. When someone ignores you, ask not, "Why did they do this to me?" but "What part of me is so terrified by being left unanswered?" You will often find that it is the abandoned child within, the one who once waited for a parent to return, for a friend to apologize, for a lover to say they were wrong, and who was met with silence instead. That inner child does not need someone else's explanation. It needs your compassion. It needs your presence, because the longing for closure is really a longing to be seen, to be held, to have our pain acknowledged. And while others may offer this at times, the most reliable source of such comfort must be our own inner strength. We must learn to say to ourselves, "Yes, this hurts. Yes, I do not understand, but I am here. I will not abandon myself in the search for someone else's permission to heal." Real life stories abound of those who waited years for closure that never came. The woman who held on to a relationship that ended in silence, rereading old messages, replaying final conversations, hoping that something would reveal the missing piece. The man who sent one more message, one more apology, thinking maybe this time she would reply. Each time they postponed their own healing, putting it in the hands of someone who had already chosen distance. And when, finally, they gave up seeking answers and turned inward, they discovered something extraordinary, that their peace did not depend on being understood. It depended on being whole. The need for closure, at its heart, is a symptom of emotional dependency. It reveals how much of our sense of self we have invested in the other. When we say, "I cannot move on without an explanation," what we are really saying is, "I cannot define my worth unless you validate it." This is a dangerous ground to stand upon, for it makes our healing conditional. And healing, if it is to be true, must be unconditional. It must say, "I choose peace even when they choose silence. I choose wholeness even when they choose absence." There is an immense power in not needing closure. It means you have stepped outside the realm of the ego, which demands and clings and negotiates, and entered the realm of the soul, which witnesses and accepts and transcends. It means that your sense of worth is no longer tethered to someone else's behavior, but rooted in your own integrity. In this sense, silence is not the enemy, it is the great teacher. It confronts us with our own shadows, our fears of rejection, our cravings for control. It offers no distractions, no explanations, no illusions. Only space, only reflection, and in that space we either fall apart or we awaken. The next time someone ignores you, resist the urge to seek closure from them. Do not send the long message. Do not plead for honesty. Instead, listen to what their silence reveals within you. Follow the thread of that discomfort all the way down, to the wound beneath the story, and meet yourself there. That is where true healing begins, not in their reply, but in your recognition. Because the truth is simple. The ones who disappear often cannot handle the weight of their own truth, let alone yours. Their silence is their ceiling, but your silence, chosen consciously, can become your liberation. Let it be not a void, but a vessel for reflection, for dignity, for growth. The closure you seek is not in their words. It is in your own willingness to stop asking and start remembering who you are. When someone you care for begins to retreat into silence, when their responses go missing and their presence fades without explanation, the human mind does not simply observe this absence, it rushes in to fill it. And it does so not with truth, but with fear. They must hate me. We think, I must have done something wrong. I must not be interesting enough. I must not be enough. This is not a rational conclusion, though it may feel deeply convincing. It is not a result of what is, but rather what was long ago in the buried corners of your soul. When we are ignored, our instinct is to personalize it, to assume it is about us. But this tendency is not born in the present moment, it is born in the psychological past. It is the echo of earlier abandonments, older rejections, formative moments when our needs were met with distance or disapproval. And these memories, though often hidden from conscious thought, shape the lens through which we view current relationships. We do not see clearly, we project, and projection is the most insidious of mental tricks because it feels so real while being so false. What you experience in silence may not be silence itself, but the sound of your own inner dialogue. And if that dialogue was written by pain, if the script was penned by early wounds, then it will distort everything. The mind, in its yearning for meaning, tries to interpret the unknown. But when that interpretation comes from a place of insecurity, it becomes dangerous. You do not see the other person for who they are. You see them as a mirror for your own unworthiness. One woman once came to me in despair. Her partner had not replied to her messages for 2 days. She was convinced he was ghosting her, that she had said too much or not enough, that she was too clingy or not interesting. Her mind spiraled with shame and self-blame. When he finally resurfaced, she learned that he had been grieving a family member had passed, and he had retreated into his own world. His silence had nothing to do with her, but the pain she felt in those 2 days was real, because her suffering was not caused by his absence, but by her own mind's interpretation of it. This is the nature of projection. We believe we are responding to reality, but we are actually responding to the emotional ghosts of our past. And this response often tells us more about ourselves than the situation. It reveals the parts of us that remain unhealed. If you believe someone ignoring you means you are unworthy, it is likely because at some point your worth was made to feel conditional. If you assume their silence means you are boring, it is because somewhere along the way your presence was not affirmed. The story you create in their absence is a map of your inner landscape. It shows you where the wounds still live. But this awareness should not lead to shame, it should lead to liberation. Because when you see that your interpretation is a projection, not a truth, you begin to regain your power. You are no longer at the mercy of someone else's behavior. You stop trying to decode their silence like a riddle you must solve to feel whole. You realize that their distance may speak more of them, their struggles, fears, limitations than of anything lacking in you. People disappear for reasons that often have nothing to do with us. They may be overwhelmed. They may be emotionally avoidant. They may not know how to communicate discomfort, or they may simply be navigating a life chapter in which they cannot hold space for another. And yes, sometimes they lose interest, but even that reflects their readiness, their preferences, their patterns. It is not an indictment of your value. To internalize someone else's silence as a verdict on your worth is to give them a power they never asked for and cannot hold. You become both judge and prisoner in a court of your own creation. This self-condemnation is a quiet form of self-abandonment, because instead of standing by yourself with compassion, you turn on yourself with accusation. And in doing so, you reinforce the very wounds you are trying to escape. But it does not have to be this way. You can choose to step back from the story your mind wants to tell. You can learn to pause, to breathe, and to say, "This silence is painful, but it does not define me." You can hold space for your discomfort without assigning it meaning that turns pain into poison. You can let the unknown remain unknown without making it about your inadequacy. This is not to say that we should ignore all signs or excuse hurtful behavior. It is important to observe patterns, to notice when someone consistently withdraws, to protect your emotional well-being. But it is equally important to differentiate observation from projection, to ask, am I reacting to what is, or to what I fear this means about me? The capacity to hold this question without collapsing into narrative is the mark of emotional maturity. It is a kind of spiritual discipline to remain rooted in yourself, even when the ground around you feels uncertain. Because what you find when you stop projecting is that you are still here, still whole, still worthy, even if someone else does not see it, even if someone else cannot say it. You begin to meet the silence not as an enemy but as a mirror. And that mirror reflects back not their rejection but your opportunity to grow, to heal, to reclaim the parts of you that once depended on others for definition. So the next time you feel ignored, resist the urge to leap to conclusions. Let the silence speak, not of your shame but of your strength. Refuse to write yourself into a tragedy that has not been confirmed. Do not confuse what someone does with what you are. And remember, your worth is not negotiable, not conditional, and certainly not defined by someone else's capacity to respond. The mind is a powerful storyteller, but you are not obligated to believe every story it tells. especially the ones that begin with the false premise that love must be earned through perfect behavior or ceaseless performance. The truth is simpler, deeper, quieter. You are enough. And sometimes silence isn't a punishment, it's an invitation. To return to yourself, to see beyond projection, to live in truth. There are moments in life when the presence of another becomes so deeply interwoven with our sense of self that their absence begins to unravel us. When someone we care about begins to pull away, when their silence speaks louder than words, it triggers something profound and primal within. The instinct is not only to grieve the loss of the connection, but to question who we are without it. And in that uncertainty, many people begin to reshape themselves, not in the quiet, natural evolution of the soul, but in the reactive, frantic movement of fear. We adapt, we adjust, we twist and contort. Some become sweeter, more agreeable, softening the edges of their truth in hopes of being more lovable. Others grow colder, more distant, wielding detachment as a shield or a punishment. But in both cases, we are no longer acting from our center. We are reacting, and in that reaction, we begin to lose ourselves. There is no deeper tragedy in love than the loss of self, not because love itself demands it, but because we mistakenly believe that it does. We tell ourselves that if we just become a little easier to love, less needy, less bold, less vulnerable, then they will stay, or return, or finally see us. But what they see, if they come back, is not us. It is the version we performed, the character we created, the mask we wore to survive their absence. And the terrible truth is this: even if they love that mask, we will not feel loved, because we will know, deep down, that it is not us they are loving. It is the shape we bent ourselves into. The pain of being unseen by another is sharp, but the pain of no longer seeing yourself, of abandoning your own essence, is deeper. To change who you are in order to be accepted is to fracture your own soul. It is to betray your inner truth in the hopes of securing external approval. And in doing so, you do not preserve the relationship. You destroy the foundation it could have been built upon. I have seen many people lose themselves in this way. The woman who dimmed her laughter because he once said it was too loud. The man who stopped talking about his passions because she rolled her eyes when he did. The friend who became the eternal peacemaker, swallowing their truth to keep the bond from breaking. Each of them, in their own way, began to vanish, piece by piece, not because the other demanded it, but because they feared that being fully themselves would be too much, or not enough. But when you compromise your authenticity to be loved, you are not building a relationship. You are building a performance, and performances require energy, constant maintenance, and eventually they fall apart. The mask cracks. The real self longs to be seen, to be heard, to breathe. And when it finally surfaces, the dissonance between who you've pretended to be and who you truly are becomes unbearable. You feel alone, even in the presence of the person you were trying so desperately to keep. Because love, to be real, must meet the real you. The great paradox is this: if you want someone to love you, to choose you, to return to you, it must be for who you truly are, not for who you think they want you to be, not for who you become in your most afraid moments, but for who you are when you are centered, honest, whole. And yes, this is a risk, because not everyone will love you in your truth. Some will walk away. Some will reject you, but that rejection, painful as it may be, is far less damaging than self-abandonment. You can recover from heartbreak. It is much harder to recover from the slow erosion of your own identity. You must never allow someone's withdrawal to dictate who you become. If they are silent, let them be. If they are absent, let them go, not out of bitterness, but out of respect for them and for yourself. Because the moment you start reshaping yourself in reaction to their behavior, you hand them power they never asked for. You make them the author of your character, and no one else can write that story. No one else should. To stand firm in your essence when someone pulls away is not weakness, it is strength. It is a radical act of self-love. It says, even in rejection, I am still me. Even in silence, I will not silence myself. Even in absence, I will not become a stranger to my own soul. This is the soil in which real connection can grow, not from manipulation or performance, but from authenticity, from the courage to be exactly who you are, even when it costs you what you thought you needed. The person who is meant to love you truly, deeply, soulfully, will not require you to hide. They will not ask you to shrink. They will not punish your vulnerability or fear your truth. They will meet you not in your perfection, but in your presence, in your wholeness, in your realness. And if that person walks away, let them, because your identity is not conditional, your worth is not up for negotiation, and your love is not something to be bartered with by sacrificing your soul. In the moments of greatest emotional challenge, when someone turns away, when their silence feels deafening, you are offered a sacred choice. Will you remain loyal to yourself, or will you become what you believe they want? Will you hold your center, or will you spin into a version of yourself that exists only to be chosen? Choose yourself every time, because the one who does not choose you in your fullness is not truly choosing you at all. And the one who does, when they arrive, will not ask you to become anything other than what you already are. You are not too much. You are not enough. You are a soul, whole and luminous, deserving of love that sees you, not just the costume you wear when afraid. So when the temptation comes to mold yourself out of fear, pause, breathe, return to your truth, because you will never regret being real, but you will always regret disappearing just to be accepted. And if you are to be loved, let it be love that knows you. Let it be love that stays, not for the version of you that begs or bends, but for the one who dares to be exactly who they are, even in the face of loss. There is a quiet, aching danger that enters the soul when someone we care about withdraws into silence. It does not arrive with drama. It slips in softly, in the pauses between unanswered messages, in the weight of empty space once filled by laughter and connection. And from that silence, bitterness begins to whisper, not loudly at first, but subtly, seductively. It tells you that to care was your mistake, that feeling deeply was your weakness, that love your love was a vulnerability that should now be sealed away. The temptation to armor the heart is not born from malice, it is born from pain. When someone ignores us, it activates a fear deeper than rejection. It activates the fear that we are invisible, unworthy, unloved. In that moment, a part of the self cries out for protection, and what is more protective than bitterness, what shields better than detachment, what feels safer than saying, I no longer care? We try to convince ourselves that by not feeling, we cannot be hurt again. That indifference is strength. That silence deserves silence. But here lies the tragedy. Bitterness does not protect you. It imprisons you. It may guard you from further harm, but it also bars the door to healing, to reconciliation, to growth. Bitterness is not a shield. It is a cage disguised as armor, and the longer you wear it, the heavier it becomes. You begin to forget the weight of your own openness. You begin to mistrust your own heart. When love has been wounded, the impulse to shut it down is natural. But love is not a weakness to be fixed. It is a force to be honored, even in pain, even in silence, even in separation. The heart, once hardened, cannot receive love, not from the one who left, and not from anyone else who may come with gentler hands and truer intentions. If someone tries to return and meets a wall instead of your truth, the relationship cannot be reborn. For love cannot bloom in a battlefield, and no reconciliation can grow where bitterness has taken root. We are taught that vulnerability is dangerous, that forgiveness is foolish, that keeping the heart open makes you an easy target. But the deeper truth is this: the heart that stays open even in grief is not weak. It is indestructible. To feel without collapsing, to love without clinging, to forgive without forgetting who you are. That is the mark of radical dignity. Radical dignity is not passivity. It does not mean allowing mistreatment or erasing boundaries. It means holding firm to the truth of your worth, while refusing to let another person's failure to love you well become the reason you stop loving altogether. You can set boundaries and still keep your soul intact. You can say enough and still say it with compassion. Bitterness, on the other hand, corrupts everything it touches. It makes you suspicious where you should be discerning. It makes you cold where you should be clear. It turns love into a contest and connection into a power struggle. It tells you that if you ignore them back, you win, that if you seem indifferent, you are in control. But love is not a war, and nobody wins when the heart is closed. Silent battles leave everyone bruised, even if no words are spoken, especially then. Consider this: even if the one who withdrew returns with remorse, with softness, with a genuine desire to reconnect, what will they find if you have built your heart into a fortress? Will they find the same soul they once knew, or a stranger armored in ice? And more importantly, will you recognize yourself, or will you have become a hardened version of who you once were, not because you chose to grow, but because you chose to shut down? Real healing comes not from retaliation, but from reflection. Not from becoming unfeeling, but from feeling deeply and choosing to stay awake in it, choosing to remain conscious, present, human. This is what it means to walk through pain without losing your essence. This is what it means to choose wholeness over defense. I once knew a man whose partner left without a word. Days turned into weeks, and in that emptiness he began to turn inward. At first, he told himself he was done caring. He wore sarcasm like armor, dismissed love as naive, convinced himself that emotional distance was strength. And for a while it worked. He felt nothing, but he also felt nothing. Joy faded, laughter dulled, the world turned gray. When the partner eventually returned, remorseful and seeking to rebuild, the man had nothing left to give, not because he no longer loved her, but because he had buried his heart so deeply he could no longer reach it. The relationship didn't fail because of her absence. It failed because of what he had done to himself in her absence. This is not to say that everyone who leaves will return, nor that every return should be welcomed. But the point is this: your heart must remain yours, no matter what another does. Your softness must not be dependent on how you are treated. If you let others dictate your openness, then you are always in reaction. You are always a mirror, never a source, and you will always live on emotional defense, never emotional freedom. The soul thrives not in protection but in presence, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not for them. It is for you. It is the decision not to let someone else's inability to meet you in love become the reason you deny yourself love going forward. It is the act of saying, I will not become bitter because of someone else's silence. I will not carry the wound as a wall. I will feel this pain, learn from it, and still choose to remain whole. If you want to build something authentic, whether with them or with someone new, you cannot bring bitterness with you. You must bring yourself fully, courageously, without armor. You must be willing to be seen again, not in naive trust, but in grounded truth. To love again, not recklessly, but wisely. So when the urge comes to close your heart, remember, it is not your heart that failed. It is not your love that was wrong. Love is never wrong. What people do with your love is theirs to answer for. But how you respond, that is your power, that is your integrity, and that is your path to peace. If someone is ignoring you, let that be their journey, not your identity. Your role is not to force their return. It is to remain anchored in your truth, your strength, your self-worth. Let your silence speak power, not punishment. Let your stillness radiate value, not absence. And if they come back, let them meet the version of you who chose dignity over reaction, clarity over chaos, and love over self-abandonment, because that is the energy that draws people back. And more importantly, it is the energy that allows you to move on, even if they never do.